In today's video, we're going to take a look at this new Dyson air purifier. And my intention with this is to try and provide a fairly down-to-earth review of this. I've been looking at these for quite a while, and with a lot of the reviews I can see, they're either quite in-depth scientific tests, which are good, but they don't really cover how you use it in a day-to-day life environment, or they're very much like lifestyle influencer type channels that talk about how it's amazing and how it's changed their life, and then they'll take a single breath of air in and talk about how it's amazing, and they don't seem totally genuine. So my plan is to take a look at this as a sort of genuine down-to-earth review where we'll look at the product just in technical details, take a tour of it, and talk about how it actually works in practice, rather than trying to fill it with marketing talk and me talk about how it's changed my life. So yeah, this is one of Dyson's new air purifiers. This is their TP07 model, which as far as I'm aware only came out in the last month or so. And at the time of filming, I can't actually find any other reviews of this model on YouTube because I think it's just so new. This is a replacement to their TP04, which is a very popular model. And essentially all it is one of those Dyson bladeless fans, but with a built-in air purifier at the base. Now the key thing with these devices is they are insanely expensive. There's no real way to justify the price, to be honest. They are, I would say, overpriced. This particular model here costs £499 if it's not on sale, which, for what it is extremely expensive. If you care about the value, you'd be much better off buying a separate air purifier for about £100 and then a separate fan for, however much a fan costs. This device is a lot nicher, and realistically, if you're buying one of these, you're buying it, first of all, for the performance, but also just for the looks. Now, for my requirements, the reason I went for this is because I needed an air purifier because I've got really bad hay fever, and every year it gets really bad, and I swear that I'm going to buy an air purifier and never do it, and then it comes out of hay fever season right as I'm almost at the tipping point of buying one. So I decided I'm going to preempt that. I'm going to buy it before I have hay fever, so I've got it for when I need it. Now, I could have just got a desktop air purifier type thing. You can get ones with similar performance to this for about £100. However, those are just designed to circulate the air within the room and purify it. They don't really work as a fan. Now, I'm buying this particular device for my living room, so it can purify the air, but also this room gets really hot, so I need some sort of fan. So I wanted something that could do both. And while you can still get fairly cheap air purifiers that can blow the air forward, you can get some tower style ones, they tend to just look really cheap and rubbish. And because I'm in a fairly small flat, I don't have lots of storage space. It's not like I've got a garage or an attic that I can store stuff in. So if I'm buying an air purifier, tower type fan device thing, it will likely have to sit out year round. So I wanted something that looked fairly decent. So realistically, the reason I paid so much for this, admittedly, was for the looks. Just because it has to sit out in my room year round, so I wanted something that was aesthetically pleasing. And I also wanted something that would perform fairly well. And this one should perform well. It doesn't perform 5 times better than a £100 air purifier, but it'll hopefully perform fairly well. So yeah, obviously the big elephant in the room with these is the price. They are stupidly expensive. I'll be the first person to say this is overpriced, but sometimes you do just pay extra because you want the looks or you want the convenience of having a single device that can just sit out year round. And that's why I went for it. So yeah, what I'll do is we'll take a look around the box and just see what features it has, but I won't go into too much detail on all like the marketing talk around it. And then we'll take it out, set it all up, take a tour of it. I'll then go away and use it for a while, and I'll come back and just talk about my experience of having it. Okay, so now we'll take a quick look around the box. As I mentioned, this is a TP07. TP defines it being one of their tower purifiers, so it's one of these tower form factor ones. They also do the DP, which is a desktop one, it's more like a sort of desk fan. And then they do the BP, which is a sort of personal one that would really only work for one person sitting next to it. So the TP is the one I went for because it can sit on the floor and hopefully do a whole room. They also do a few different versions, including ones that have built-in heaters. This doesn't have that because I've got gas central heating, so using a resistive electric heater would just be way more expensive than running the central heating. But they do a heating version. This one isn't that one, and hence why it says Purifier Cool. And this is something that a lot of people get confused about or deliberately mislead people on, depending on who you believe. They do say Purifier Cool, and they talk about how it cools you. This is not an air conditioner, it's just a fan. That's all it is. It doesn't cool down the air. And I've seen a mix of some reviews of people where people are saying the room's so much cooler because I use the Dyson cooler. It doesn't cool the room down. Or I've seen people in comments on YouTube asking how much does it cool the room down, or why didn't you show how much it decreased the temperature of the room? This is just a fan, it's not an air conditioner. So it will just blow air around the room, and if that air blows across your skin, it will evaporatively cool you and it'll make you feel cooler, but it won't make the room cooler. In fact, actually running one of these in a room based on physics would actually make the room hotter because there's a motor in this producing heat. But anyway, yeah, it says Purifier Cool, but it's not an air conditioner, it is just a fan. But let's look at the front of it. It's a very big box. I'm 6 foot tall and it comes up quite high, it's pretty large. But yeah, that's it there, around the side, just pictures. Shows what it takes out the air. Picture in the back, all Dyson stuff about, oh, it's sensors, oh, technology, woo, fancy. And then more pictures. So basically just standard Dyson marketing there. We'll set it all up and then I'll look at all the features and talk about the filtration stuff it does do. But the filtration performance, as far as I can tell, looking compared to other ones in theory, is very much average. It's a good device and it'll probably perform very well, but it's not really, you know, if you're wanting just a pure air purifier where you don't really care about the fan part of it, there's probably better value options. Well, there are better value options. And likewise, if you spent £500 on a non-Dyson normal air purifier, you'd probably get a much better unit, at least in terms of filtration performance. So let's get this out. So now let's open this up and quickly assemble it. So it's still sealed, so I'll be giving my first impression on seeing it in person. I don't think I've seen one of their desktop fans before, but never seen one of their tower ones. I suspect it's going to be much bigger than I thought it would be, because I've checked the dimensions and it is very large, but we'll see. So I'll do that. Undo that. Undo that. I'm still kind of confused as to what the benefit is of the TP07 over the older TP04. As far as I can see, the only difference is that apparently it's 20% quieter, which would be good, to be honest, because I do need something quiet, because I'll be watching TV when I've got it on. And that it's a slightly different design, and the design does look a little bit better, which is why I kind of went for the newer model. But also because at the time of buying it, the older model wasn't really much cheaper, because they tend to just replace models rather than like heavily discount the old ones. So that's it there. Get that out. And here it is. So comes fully assembled, that's good. I was half expecting it to come in like 2 halves, but nope. Warranty stuff, paperwork, whatever. Over here we get a box of accessories, it looks like. So we've got a remote control on top. Take a look at that later. And presumably, yeah, that's just a power cable and nothing else in the box. Actually, good to see it comes with a power, a normal mains plug. I don't know why, I was half expecting this to have a power brick. I don't know why I was expecting that, but I thought it might, in which case that would be a pain. Although, very confusingly, that has a 13 amp fuse in it. Bit of a random one. Don't know why you'd have a 13 amp fuse on a 40 watt fan. I suppose the flex is rated for it, it's fine, but yeah, just a bit of a weird decision. It's because it only used about 40 watt. But then we've got the device itself, so let's lift this out. And there it is. It's actually not that heavy at all, like that's easy to lift up with one hand. But that's there, we'll get it out to the side, get the other bits out, and then we'll unpack it with the box out the way. So these are the 2 HEPA filters. Get the 2 in the box as well, we'll take a look at these later as well. So get all the box out the way, and then we'll take a look at it all. Okay, so now let's unwrap this and see what it looks like. So it's just in this plastic here, that comes off. And yeah, it looks pretty good. It is just plastic, it feels good enough quality, it doesn't feel anything insane, you know, it's plastic, but don't know what you'd expect. Although with the TP07, they have slightly changed this design, which I massively prefer. The old one, the TP04, it had what looked more like lots of individual slots around the side, whereas this one, it still has that, but they've recessed the bits that go across inside, so it looks more like a continuous slot, so it looks a lot nicer, which I do prefer. But yeah, it seems pretty good. Obviously there's a lot of stuff here I want to talk about when I'm actually talking about the features of it, because I want to explain how all this works, so I'll do that in a second. I'm just looking at the outside of it just now. But that's it there. It's light enough as well, which is quite good, because it means I can easily move it between rooms, because let's face it, I can't afford to buy 3 of these to have these in all the rooms, so being able to just carry it between rooms if I do need it, say, in the bedroom, for example, I can just take it through, so that's not too bad. So that's it there. What we'll now do is we'll go down the bottom and take a look at all the bits down there, put the filters in, and and then we'll try it out. Okay, so now we're down at the bottom here, some stickers on it, and this is where we put the filters in, so we can rotate it around. There's some tape holding it shut. Now, somewhat disappointingly, this isn't actually metal, this is all plastic. I suppose it makes it lighter, and it doesn't really need to be metal, but yeah, this is all just actually plastic that's painted to look like metal. It isn't made of metal, which is a bit unfortunate. But yeah, that's there. And then this comes off here, so you seal it shut. And then on the side here, what you've got is the bit that actually samples the air. So this will automatically sense the air quality, and it can adjust, it can show a little display of what pollutants are in the air, and it can adjust its speed accordingly and turn itself on and off based on pollutants. And that's what this does here. This pulls air in through these slots, and then it circulates around inside, checks the air, and then it can analyse it. So that's what these holes are used for here. And yeah, then it lists here, yeah, particulate PM10, VOC chemicals, and lists all the chemicals that it apparently detects. So yeah, these slots are used to basically pull air in to analyse it. And then another sticker down here. Pull that off, and then we can put the filters in. So now let's put the filters in, so we can just push these down, and then this cover comes off, and then same at the front, and then we can fit the filters in here. Now, one change they seem to have done with this is the previous ones had two separate filters. They had a HEPA filter and an activated carbon filter, and there were two separate parts that you would install behind each other. The HEPA filter filters particles from the air, so it filters out things like dust, pollen, all those sorts of things. Then the activated charcoal filter, that collects things like gases. This device also has them. It has both. It's got the HEPA filter on the outside and the activated carbon filter on the inside. However, on this, they're a single unit now. You can't replace them independently. Now, I don't know how big a deal that is, because with the previous one anyway, you could only really buy them in a set of two filters anyway, so you were going to replace them at the same time anyway, but yeah, seems a bit of a weird decision. Now, as for the price of the filters, that's not ideal. These are about £65. However, they rate that these can last for a year, so still a lot of money. Now, with the old ones, you can quite easily get third-party filters now. They're available for maybe even £25 for a set. They're probably not maybe as good as the official ones, but you can get aftermarket filters. With this new model here, you can't get them, unfortunately. They don't seem to sell them yet, although equally Dyson currently don't have stock on the filters for this anyway, so maybe they just haven't started making them yet. But there should be about a year before you have to replace the filters, and hopefully by then some third-party filters will have come on the market. And also, when they say a year, I don't know if you might get longer in the year. I don't know if they're treating it like printer ink, where they'll say you need to replace it every year, when actually it'll last a little bit longer. I suppose it very much depends on your use. Apparently it will tell you when the filters need replaced, so it'll be interesting to see how that works. Like, does it actually sense the quality of the air going in and out the filters and then compare it, or is it just a timer? Because those are very different things. So yeah, filters just clip in like that, very easy to do, and then in theory this little cover goes on the back. There, and then same around the front. Clip that on. There. So yeah, that's all the filters in. So yeah, it was a fairly easy process to do. It doesn't feel terrible, it just does feel a little bit plasticky. I mean, it is plastic, but yeah, I was expecting this to be a bit more metallic, but yeah, it's just plastic. But anyway, now let's plug it in and turn it on. So get the plug it in over here and see if it works. So that should have power, so if we press the button, there we go, it's turning on. Probably to test my wind filter on my microphone here because that's blowing right at me. But yeah, it seems to work pretty well, showing the air quality on it here. Now, I won't just start showing it straight off the bat now, because I have no idea how this works. I haven't used it yet. So what I'll do is I'll go away off camera, use it for a bit, figure out how it actually works, and then I'll come back and talk about it. Okay, so I've now been using it for a little while, so I've got a bit more experience with how it all works. So what I'll do is I'll talk through all the features and demonstrate it all, then I'll give my impressions of it. So I've got the device sitting here just powered off in standby, and in terms of controls, all you've actually got on the machine itself is just a power button. So you can't really control it without the remote. I mean, you can turn it on and off, but that's really it. So realistically, you need the remote. However, the remote's really nice because it actually sits and connects magnetically on top of the machine, so you can just sit up there so you don't lose it. However, interestingly, the remote's like curved on the front so it can bed down into the top of the machine, but that's on the button side. So you can't really have it with the buttons facing up, so you could like reach over and just press it. You do have to lift it off to access the buttons, because it won't magnetically attach to the buttons facing up, it will only attach if the buttons are facing down. But that's fine, I suppose. And now here you've got the remote. The remote's pretty good. It is all plastic, but it does still feel pretty well made. The only sort of gripe I have is that it's an infrared remote. On a device at this price point, I was kind of expecting this to be an RF remote, because that would be quite nice, because then you wouldn't need to worry about where you're pointing it, you could just use it anywhere and it would work. With this one, it will be a bit directional, you do need to point it at the device, but from what I've used, it's been absolutely fine. You can point it a bit off angle and it's okay. You don't have to get it bang on, so it's not too bad. But an RF remote would have been nice to see. So then here we've got the buttons. What I'll do is I'll do a quick talk through of all of these and then I'll demonstrate them. So on the front, you've got the power button. This information button, that cycles through different things it shows on its built-in LCD display. So it can cycle through showing all the different pollutants that are in the atmosphere. You can cycle through the different types and see them. You've then got the speed adjustment here, up and down. Auto, which switches it into auto mode, where it senses pollutants and then automatically reacts to that. This one sets the oscillation. This one sets sleep timer functionality. And this one reverses the direction of the fan, which I'll demonstrate in a second, because that's quite a nice little feature. So now let's demonstrate this. Okay, so now let's demonstrate it. So first of all, we'll just turn it on. You'll see the screen will come on and it'll ramp up. And that's running on level 5, and that puts out a good amount of air. And it's not that loud. I'll talk about the noise levels in a minute. But that's it running there. And as you can see, you can turn the speed up and down using the remote. So it goes all the way up to 10, and then it goes all the way down to 9. Or all the way down to 1. Like that. There's also the auto mode. So if you press that, it'll then come up saying auto on the display. And what that'll now do is it'll use the amount of pollutants it's detecting to adjust the fan speed. So when it's not detecting really any pollutants at all, when the air is really clean, the fan basically turns off. It runs, but it runs at a really low speed, much lower than number 1. So it only draws maybe about 3 watts from the wall, so it draws very little power and just produces the slightest draft, which I actually really like, because if I'm sitting on the couch, I'll sometimes just leave this on auto and it'll just give a very slight draft and it can be really nice. But then what it'll do is if it detects pollutants in the air, it will ramp the fan up. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but I did properly test that and it does work. Next you've got this I button, and this cycles through all the different information modes on the display. So we press it, so you see by default it shows this here, and all this is just showing is the air quality. It's a sort of index that it calculates. And essentially what you've got there is you've got a green line that runs along the bottom of the screen, and that goes up and down depending on the air quality. So if the air quality gets bad, there's some pollutant introduced, the line will jump up. And then it'll sort of show this is a very quick, so this is like the air quality over like the last few seconds. So it more shows how it's changing. You can press the I button, and this now shows the air quality over a 24-hour period. It's not really showing much here because I just turned it on because I've had it turned off. So I think you need to really leave it at least switched on at the mains to have it record this. But what this will do is it'll just show like a graph over the last 24 hours of the air quality. If we go into this is now showing the PM2.5s. So these are the very small particles, things like viruses and things like that. I don't know the exact science, but it's very small particles, PM2.5. This is showing the level. So you can just leave it showing whatever you want, so that you could leave it showing this long term. As you can see, it's showing 1 microgram per meters cubed, and that's what it's sensing. Press the I button again, that'll go to PM10s, that's things like pollen and dust, that's larger particles, and it'll show a readout of that. And again, it's 1 microgram per meter cubed. This has been running basically all day, which is why it's really low. It was a bit higher in the morning. When I turned it on this morning, having not run it all day, it was about 5 of each of those, which was still pretty low. It was still saying that was good. But we'll talk about that in a minute when I actually tested it. So that's PM10s, press it again. VOCs, these are volatile organic compounds apparently. It's sort of like harmful gases or whatever. This doesn't give you a number on this display, it just shows a little picture. But I think this is like a little bar graph that goes up or down. NO2, that's car exhaust apparently. You can have it display that. Then it just shows the temperature, humidity. That's the sort of filter life it shows. So it talks about how long the filter has left. I don't know how accurate this is. I'd like to think it's maybe doing some sort of sensing, so it's like detecting the outside air and then detecting the air after it's been filtered and trying to calculate how effective the filtration is. or maybe it's looking at like how good the airflow is flowing through the filter. Hopefully it's doing that. I'd much rather it did that than just, rather than be some sort of basic timer that goes, you've had it on for a year, therefore you need to change it. Hopefully it does some sort of calculation. I did at least see a video of someone talking about comparing some aftermarket filters to the official one, and they did say that the aftermarket ones had their life on this meter decrease quicker than the official ones. And the official ones aren't chipped at all, so there's no way they could really tell, I don't think. So I would like to think this is actually calculating the filter, not just using a basic timer. Then this one just shows the Wi-Fi status, and we'll take a look at that in a second. Or you can put it back to this display. So yeah, that works. So that's the information. The next feature is the oscillation. And this is actually something that this does do really well. When I saw this advertised, they advertised how it has a 350 degree oscillation. So essentially it can rotate basically 360 degrees. It just can't turn around entirely all the way because of how the mechanism works, but it can turn basically in any direction. But of course with that, you wouldn't necessarily want it doing that all the time, because if you've got a fan that's constantly rotating 350 degrees and you're sitting in front of it, that would just be annoying. So the oscillation is actually variable, and it's something that I wish more fans would adopt. Because most fans have an oscillation of about 90 degrees, and that's good for most situations, but say you're sitting on your own, you might want it to oscillate to say get your whole body, especially if you're say lying out. But sometimes 90 degrees can be too much for that, because it'll just sweep past you constantly and it won't really just only oscillate over your body. Or if you've got a big group, 90 degrees might not be enough. So this is actually variable. So if I press the oscillation button, that lets me cycle through different angles. So I can say to oscillate at 45 degrees, and then that will just do a very slight oscillation, just 45 degrees, which is really good. This is ideal if I'm just sitting on my own on the couch. And it's much closer, much tighter than a normal 90 degree fan, which is what my old one was. So this is a really good one to have. You can then turn that to 90 degrees. This is what you'd expect from a traditional fan. It just oscillates 90 degrees. And what's good with the controls on this is when you press the oscillation button, if you press it multiple times, it cycles through the different angles. But once you've gone out that menu and it's oscillating, if you press it once more, it will stop oscillating. It won't skip you to the next angle. So it's quite good like that, because it means you can skip to different angles very quickly, but then you can stop it oscillating with a single button. You don't have to like press this button multiple times to switch through all the different angles before you can then get to the off position. So that's 90 degrees. You can go in there and change it to 180, and that'll go even further. And then we'll take a look at the app, because the app's really cool in that you can actually tell it to point at different angles and change the center point of the oscillation. So as you can see, that's now doing 180, which is really quite useful. This is good if you've, say, got quite a large room of people and you want it to maybe sit against a wall and just fan the entire room. Or if you're just wanting it to circulate air or do purification, it'd be quite nice just to let it distribute the air quite freely around the room. And then finally we've got 350 degrees, so we can switch that on there, and that'll do the full 350 degree rotation. If I can actually get it to hit that option. There we go. So that'll now do a full 350 degree rotation. I won't make you sit through this whole thing, but you'll see it'll rotate all the way around and then face basically totally away, and then it'll come back around and do the exact same the other way. So this can be quite good if you've got it sitting in the centre of a room. Obviously you wouldn't do this if it was sitting against a wall or in a corner, but if it was sitting against sitting in the middle of like a really large room, or you've say got the sort of living room where you've got it divided in two, you've got maybe a living area and a separate kitchen area or a dining area, and you've maybe got some sort of furniture in the middle that divides that space, and you might want to have your fan sitting in that area that's dividing the space. It means you could actually have this properly rotate and cool the whole space, not just one half. And it can just be nice that you don't have to then constantly get up and move the fan around. But as you see here, there's 350 degree rotation. Probably not worth the extra money for it, but it is a nice little thing if you did. It's a nice little feature to have, to be honest. And if you did have a space that requires something like this, it is quite nice. Next we have a sleep timer. So there's just a little sleep timer button on the remote. And when you press that, you can cycle through different times on the display, 1 hour, 2 hour, or off. So you can pick a number of hours, leave it, and then it will just continuously run until that time elapses, and then it'll turn off. So you can just use this if you're going to bed. You can set a timer for a couple of hours, and it'll switch itself off once you're asleep, so it won't run all night. And what is quite nice with the sleep timer is it actually dims the display. So it's still on there, but it's a lot dimmer, so if you were sleeping, it's not lighting up the room, which is quite good. But yeah, you can just turn that off there. So turn it off and it's now, the sleep timer's off. So yeah, it's got a sleep timer as well, which at that price I would definitely expect it to have. But yeah, the sleep timer works. The final feature we'll take a look at is how we can reverse the airflow. So currently this is on full speed and it's blowing air forward. So if I hold a bit of toilet paper in front, you can see the air is blowing forward out in front of the fan. And if we move it around behind the fan, at the side here, you can see there's no airflow. There's not really any airflow coming out of it. However, if we put the paper in front of the fan like that, and we press this airflow direction reverse button, you'll hear, it does a little animation, you'll hear a noise as some levers or air deflectors inside move, and you'll see that the air has now stopped coming out the front. It's no longer blowing toilet paper. But if we move the paper around the side here, you can see it's now blowing air out the back. Like that. And if I then put the paper back in front again, and turn the direction back to normal, you'll hear the air deflectors move, and it starts blowing again out the front. And once again, it won't be blowing out the back. Now this is because of the air purifier, and it's actually quite a smart design. What this means is that you can either use this as a fan to blow air towards you, or you can have it work more as a pure air purifier and not blow air into the room and cause a draft. So right now it's working as a fan, so it's blowing air forwards, but if I reverse the airflow, it's now no longer going to blow air out the front. Instead, it's going to direct air out the back through this slot round the side. There's a slot on the side of it. And because it's blowing out the side, rather than through the actual air multiplier mechanism, it doesn't have that air multiplier process. So you don't actually have this pulling additional air in through the back and doing that 15 times airflow thing. So it's now not blowing as much air around the room. It's only taking the air from the purifier unit and blowing it out the back. Whereas when it's coming out the front, it's blowing the air from the air purifier unit out, but it's also sucking additional air in the back and blowing it out because of the air multiplier. So this means that you can actually use it to sort of purify a room without necessarily having to have it act as a fan. You can sit it in the corner of a room, switch it onto this mode, and it'll blow air out the back at a lower velocity without having to blow it out the front. So that's a really nice feature to have, and it's something I wasn't expecting it to do. So it means you can use it as a standalone air purifier without necessarily having to have it blow air at you. Now, this isn't absolutely perfect. You still get a little bit of air coming out here, just because it's obviously not a fully airtight seal. So there's a little bit of air does kind of come out here, but it's not enough to cause the air multiplier effect, so you don't really feel a huge amount of air. And that's with it on the maximum setting. If you turn it down to, say, level 5 or something, you don't really get much air out here at all. It's like the tiniest little leakage, and there's no air multiplier effect. Basically all the air is coming out the back. So it does mean that you might get a slight draft from it. Additionally, if it stays sitting against a wall, the air coming out the back can kind of just cause a little bit of air turbulence and air circulation in the room, which could cause a slight draft, but it's nowhere near as noticeable as the fan actually blowing at you. So this is really good. So it means if it's, say, a colder day and you don't actually want the fan working and blowing air at you to cool you down, but you do still want it to work as a purifier, you can reverse the direction and it will work fine. So yeah, that's a pretty nice feature to have as well. Okay, so now that I've demonstrated all the features and tried it out a bit, I can now talk about how I found it. Has this device absolutely changed my life? Is it the most revolutionary thing I've ever bought? Is it totally changing me into some sort of lifestyle influencer? No, it's just a fan. But it is pretty good. What I'll do is I'll kind of compare it in two different parts because the purifier and fan kind of are a bit different. So in terms of how it works as a fan, it's really good. Now, to compare it to something else, I've just got my old fan here, which is just a cheap tower fan I bought many years ago in Maplin, and it works okay. But it costs more than under a tenth of the price of the Dyson. It was only about £30 or something. So we'll be comparing these two. Is the Dyson, more than 10 times better or more powerful than the cheap tower fan? No. But it does have a few nice features that make it a bit better. So in terms of the overall output power, the Dyson is pretty good, but it's not mind-blowing. It has a flow rate of 290 litres a second, which sounds quite a lot, and it is quite a lot, but it is a bit lower than Dyson's tower fans. it seems as though going for the purifier, you do get lower airflow than you get for the fans. As a comparison, this has a flow rate of 290 litres a second, whereas in contrast, the Dyson AM07, which is just their tower non-purifier fan, just their normal fan, has a flow rate of about 500 litres a second as far as I can tell. So you do sacrifice some of the flow rate for going for the purifier model. But the flow is pretty good and it is pretty powerful. But it's not mind-blowing at all. In fact, comparing these two to each other, they basically have it on maximum speed, they've kind of got the same flow rate. So it's not super powerful. But where it does definitely benefit is how sort of almost concentrated the airflow is, if that makes sense. The best description I can really think is if I switch both these fans on to full speed and sit super close to them, they both feel very similar. But as you move further away, the air from the basic tower fan kind of dissipates quicker, whereas the Dyson's a bit more directional, so you can feel it from further away. It's almost like the difference between, like, say, a light bulb or a torch or flashlight and a laser. You know, the laser's going to be more pinpoint and stay concentrated for longer. And that's kind of what I feel with this. You can sit further away and still feel the airflow, whereas on this one it kind of dissipates a bit quicker. Now, that's a nice little thing to have, but the main thing I've noticed with it though is it means you can run the Dyson at lower speeds. With the tower fan, I found that if you're sitting a bit further away, I've got it sitting in the corner of the room and I'm sitting on the couch, you've still got to run this at a reasonably high speed. And even the lowest speed on this tower fan is probably about level 5 on the Dyson. So, you know, this tower fan has 3 different speeds. The lowest one is maybe 5 on the Dyson. The middle one is maybe about 7 on the Dyson, and the highest one is probably close enough to 10 on the Dyson. So it's always a lot faster. Whereas with the Dyson, you can run it at a really low speed. Even like level 3 is enough to get a nice breeze from quite far away from it. But because you're running it at a slower speed, it's a lot quieter. At full speed, it can be quite loud, so you definitely wouldn't want to run it at full speed in the corner of the room if you're, say, trying to watch TV or listen to music. But if you just want a sort of gentle breeze, you can run this at a really low speed and still feel it from quite far away, which is really good. So yeah, as a fan, in terms of power, it's not mind-blowingly powerful, but it is pretty good. And just having that directional airflow is really nice. The other thing I've noticed is that the jet out of the Dyson feels a little bit wider than that out of the tower fan. This means that if I lie on the couch and I've got both fans blowing at me, the Dyson covers a wider area of my body without having to oscillate. Whereas with the tower fan, you really do need it to oscillate if I'm, say, lying out, just to get my whole body. So the Dyson's a little bit better in that respect as well. Now, the other thing that they push a lot is they talk about how that the air multiplier bladeless technology doesn't buffet the air, and it somehow, you know, a normal fan must apparently feel like you're getting slapped in the face because they make it out to be so bad. What do I notice with that? Does it make a big difference? Not hugely. Now, admittedly, this tower fan it's a tower fan with a cylinder in it that spins vertically, so it's maybe a bit different to a traditional fan with fan blades. And if you sit really close to it, you maybe can feel the slight buffeting from the cylinder spinning in it, but it's not too bad or really that noticeable. And sure enough, with the Dyson, you don't get that as much. If you sit really close to it, you do just get a constant stream of air. So in that respect, it is noticeable. But for a fan like this, it's more designed to cool you from a distance in a room, it's not as big a deal. I think you notice it more if you're using one of their desk fans or you're sitting really close to it, because at that point you're going to get very smooth airflow. However, when you're sitting at any sort of real distance from, a couple of meters from it, just the turbulence of air in the room, just, the heat or air moving around the room or drafts and things like that, they just cause the air to sort of slightly get disrupted. It's not the same as the sort of buffeting, you don't feel it like hitting you, but it's just, you can feel the pressure and slightly change as it's blowing on you. It's not a properly constant stream when you're at a distance, just because of air turbulence in the room. So in terms of like the overall comfort of the air, it's very similar really. You're just with the Dyson, you're potentially getting a bit more of it pushes it a bit further so you can sit a bit further away from it, and it seems to cover a slightly wider area of your body. So it is better, but it's not mind-blowing, it's not this most insane thing in the world. But the main thing I found with this is just because the air can seem to travel much further before it gets dissipated, you can run at a much lower speed, which is good. So you can have it set to a really low speed, have it really quiet, and still get a nice airflow from it. In fact, even on level 1, if I sit on the couch, which is maybe 2 meters away from it, I still feel a very slight breeze, which is really nice. So now let's talk about the purifier in this, because that's obviously the reason you would buy this over the typical fan models. And to be honest, I found it to work pretty well, but you do just need to be quite careful about the specs because they're not maybe as good as they might look on paper just due to a few things. But it does work. So it's currently sitting on auto mode, and I thought I'd just demonstrate it. So this is currently sensing the pollution in the air around it, and then it'll react accordingly. So because there's no real pollution in the air, it's been running all day, it's running at a super low speed. I mean, it's below the speed of level 1. It's producing the slightest draft. But if I spray an air freshener around it, hopefully it should come on. So if I spray that around it, hopefully it should then detect that pollution in the air, and then it will ramp itself up. Try and get it around the back where the sensor is. Almost give that a little bit of time. And what I've noticed is, yep, there you go, you can see it's picked it up, and it's turned itself on. That's probably going to get quite loud now, but yeah, that's running. And what I've noticed is that when it's at idle, there's a very slight fan noise inside it. What we can see there, it's actually detected VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which must be what that air freshener is because of the gas. So it's detected that. But what I've found is that when it's at idle, there's a very slight fan noise from inside it, not the main fan. There seems to be a sensor inside it that's pulling air in and constantly sampling it. So that seems to be how it's working. And as you can see, that's now running. So it's made the air quality, it's detected that, it's gone into the yellow, and it's now running and hopefully clearing that air up. And you can see it's dropping down really quickly because obviously it was just sprayed just in front of it, so it'll pick it, but it'll pull that in very quickly and clear it out. So it does work. And now I've tested this a little bit, and I'm pretty happy with the purification performance. I've not obviously used it super extensively, but what I have done is for example, I've run it when I've been cooking. For my lunch especially, I use one of those sort of George Foreman grills, not George Foreman, but similar idea type contact grills. And I have to switch it on ages before cooking to let it heat up. So I'll switch that on, go back and sit at my desk and do some more work. And by that time it's heating up and it is producing a bit of smoke. And in particular, you can smell that quite strongly in the living room. And the smell does travel through to my office a little bit as well. So what I did the other day is I made my lunch as usual and then switched the purifier on in the living room after I did that. And it went absolutely mad. It went right up into the reds and had, super high levels of particle matter because of the smoke. So I just let this run, and it ran on full speed like this and just sat running for, don't know how long because I was working, but, half an hour, or something like that. And I just let it run. And then I came back into the living room after it had stopped and it had calmed itself down again. And the living room didn't really smell that much. The smell had dissipated quite quickly and I didn't really notice it. But if I left the living room and went back into my office, I could smell it again. So that shows to me that it did work, because the way my flat's laid out is my kitchen is off the living room, and then to go from my kitchen to my office, you have to walk through the living room. You've got to walk out the kitchen, into the living room, out the living room, into the hallway, and then into the office. So for the smell to be in the office, but not the living room, that shows that this has worked, because this was clearing the air in here, but the office that's actually further away, and therefore would have got less of the smoke, actually had a stronger smell in it. So it does seem to work. It's not quite hay fever season yet, so I've not been able to test it with that, but I'm really hoping that'll work. But as you can see, it's detected that air freshener, it went right up into the yellow, even into the red, and now it's gone back down into the green. Of course, it's helpfully turned off camera there, but when you see it turn around, you'll see it's now going back down into the green, and then it's ramping the fan speed down slowly. And it's also quite cool that I had it set to oscillation there, but because it was on auto and it wasn't really needing to clear the air, it just sat still and didn't rotate. So it means you can actually have it on oscillation and say, right, when you're to purify the air, actually oscillate, but when it's not clear in the air, it can just sit still, which is really quite neat. So yeah, that shows the detection there, and now just a little chat about how I found it. And it does seem to clear the air quite well. So the purification performance seems really good, and I'm very happy with it. However, there's just something you need to bear in mind if you're buying one of these, especially if you're comparing it to other purifiers, and that is the specifications that they give. Dyson give a total overall airflow rate of 290 litres a second. And that works out to 1,044 cubic metres an hour. However, this has their Dyson air multiplier, which is where you have that big ring at the top. They pull air in through the purifier, blow it out the front, and in the process of doing that, the shape of this multiplier means that negative air pressure builds at the back, sucks more air through, and it means you get more air blown out the front of it than is actually pulled through the purifier. And this is something Dyson push in a lot of their products, including all their other bladeless fans. And they talk about how it pulls much more air in through the back than they actually need to produce through the fan blades. So that just is important to bear in mind, because with this, not all of the air you feel coming out the front of this is actually passing through the purifier. The majority of the air is actually coming in through the back due to the air multiplier effect. Only a small amount of it is coming in through the purifier. Now, if you look at Dyson's specs for all of their air multiplier products, in particular just their high-level marketing stuff, they give a figure of 15 times multiplication. So that's saying that 15 times the air coming through the purifier at the bottom is coming in the back. So the vast majority comes in through the back. I don't think it's that high on this model. I did a little bit of testing where I sealed the back of it off with cling film, sat in front of it, felt the airflow, took the back off, sat in front of it, and it didn't feel like 15 times. But to get a bit more of a scientific result, I couldn't test it myself, but there's a really good video on a YouTube channel called Vacuum Wars, where they don't test the TP07, but they test the older TP04, which has the same total flow rate of 290 litres a second. And what they did is they sealed the base of the fan in a box and used an airflow meter to measure how much air was actually going through the base of it. And in their testing, they calculated that the TP04 took in 63 cubic feet a minute. That works out to 29.7 litres a second. So I would like to say that that's probably very similar to this, because it's a very similar design of fan. So that gives a multiplication factor of maybe about 10 times, which seems a bit about right, potentially. So even though you're seeing that nice figure of 290 litres a second of airflow, that doesn't mean it's purifying at 290 litres a second. It's potentially purifying at closer to 29.7 litres a second. If we convert that to cubic metres an hour, that comes out to about 106.9. Now, if you compare that to other purifiers on the market, that makes this very much average. If you look on Amazon, most of the sort of basic sort of cylinder purifiers have a flow rate of around that or even above that. Now, admittedly, with some of these generic products on Amazon, you never quite know what the actual rate is, because they do tend to have that thing where they just try and one-up each other in terms of their specs, even though they're not actually changing the product, they're just changing what they claim. But yeah, at a flow rate of around 100 cubic metres an hour, it's very much average as a purifier. You're not getting that stupid like 1,000 cubic metres an hour. You know, you are getting around about 100 cubic metres an hour of purifying performance, just with more airflow. Now that's absolutely fine in my mind, I don't have a problem with that. Trying to pull, 290 litres a second through a HEPA filter probably is quite a difficult task. But it's just important to bear that in mind if you're comparing them. Don't look at the 290 litres a second and then compare that to all the other purifiers you can find and go, well, none of the other ones have that airflow. With this one, not all of the air it's blowing out is purified. However, as long as you bear that in mind, it does work pretty well. The reason you've got that higher flow rate is just because it also needs to work as a fan. If this only had a flow rate of 100 cubic metres an hour, it would be a hopeless fan. It would barely blow any air at you. So it does make sense. It's just important to bear in mind how they're calculating those specs, just so you don't get confused. Now let's take a quick look at the power consumption. So at the bottom of your screen, we've got a little power meter, that's showing the power consumption in watts, and it's sitting in standby here, and it's using 1.7 watts, which is really low. And it's worth mentioning with this, that with that 1.7 watts, it is actually doing stuff. Currently it's connected to the Wi-Fi, and also I've enabled continuous monitoring, which means it can collect air quality data for the app, so it is currently running and sampling the air. In fact, if you put your ear up really closely to it, you can hear a very slight hum from a fan inside that's sampling the air. So even though it's drawing 1.7 watts, it is actually doing stuff with that. Now if we turn it on, we'll turn it on to the lowest fan speed, and we can see it jumps up to 4 watts it's sort of stabilised at, and again that's pretty low. I'm currently standing maybe meter and a half away from it, and it's weak, but I can still feel a slight draft coming from it, so it is actually usable even at this lowest speed, although it is very weak. If we turn it up to say level 5, we can see it's now drawing about 7.1 watts, so very low. I'm standing at the same distance, and there's now actually quite a bit of air. It's not super powerful, it's just more of a slight draft. But this is a sort of level that if it was a hot day, this would be enough to cool me. And that's at drawing 7 watts to do that. Turn it all the way up to speed to level 10. We can see the power consumption is climbing. I think it does slowly ramp the speed of the fan up. And it's now drawing about 29 watts, so about 29-30 watts at full speed. Still standing about the same distance, about 1.5 to 2 meters away, and I can now feel quite a lot of air coming out of it. So the power consumption does seem pretty good. It's nothing mind-blowing. If I compare it to that old tower fan, where I said at full speed they roughly have about the same air output, the tower fan at that point draws about 50 watts, whereas this draws about 30. It's definitely a power saving, but would you pay the £500 off in power savings? Highly unlikely. So yeah, power consumption is fine, it's nothing insane, but yeah, doesn't seem to draw too much power at all. Okay, so now let's talk about the app control. The app is very easy to set up. You just need to install it on the phone, it'll find the device, you can then enter your Wi-Fi details, and then the fan will connect over Wi-Fi. So I think it pairs over Bluetooth, does the initial setup, the fan then connects to your Wi-Fi network, and it'll just sit on Wi-Fi. And it seems to work really well, so we'll take a look at the features. But I'm going to have a rant right now, because of the first thing I noticed as soon as I tried this out. In fact, I even noticed this before I bought it, because it's something I do as a rule. If I'm ever buying a smart device, I always download the app before I buy it, just to check. And that is that it requires an account to log in to use the app. And this is a really annoying thing for me, and it's something that drives me mad about smart devices. Once you've set it up, you can use the device offline, it will just control it over your local network, or you can be away from home and control it over the internet. Now for internet control, at that point having an account is excusable, because you might need to actually have an account to go through the Dyson servers to talk to your fan. That's fair. However, in my mind it should always be optional, because all I really want to do is control this if I'm at home. I have no desire to control this over the internet. So I really have no need to have a cloud account to log in on the app to use the fan. This could be controlled totally locally. And the reason I say this is in terms of long-term support. Because with this app, it now has to talk to servers at Dyson to do the initial login process. If in a few years' time, Dyson stops supporting these fans, stop doing the app, I mean, they might even go out of business. Presumably not, but they might. If those servers get shut down or the app becomes deprecated, the login process might stop working. However, if you already had the app installed on your phone, or you say had an APK file or you could sideload it onto your phone, you could normally still use it if the app didn't require an account. However now, if in say 5-10 years time, I want to use the app and it's no longer on the Play Store, and it's no longer got the back-end servers running its support operating, I can no longer just sideload that app onto my phone and use it, because it'll get to the login step and then won't let me log in because the servers will be down. So that's really concerning, and it's really annoying that it does that. So I set it up anyway just because I did want to try it out, but that is definitely annoying. But once it's set up, the app is actually really slick. Now you don't really need the app, and that is a really good thing with this, is as I mentioned earlier, the remote has basically all the functionality you would need. So it's not like you need the app to control it. That would be a lot worse if you needed the app to use it. It's perfectly usable just with the remote. But apart from that, the app is pretty good. So here's the main screen here. You can have other devices in it if you wanted to. And this just shows the overall air quality in the room, the temperature, the humidity, and then it says the percentage of VOCs. I think that's because that was the most recent thing that freaked it out, because I sprayed the air freshener. I've seen that before will show particle matter, so I think it's maybe the most recent thing that caused it to switch on. Down the bottom it then gives us a few settings, so we can turn it on and off, switch it to auto mode, adjust the fan speed, control the oscillation, like that. You've then got this button in the bottom right. You can press that and that pulls up this larger remote, which as before lets you adjust the airflow speed, oscillation, which we'll take a look at in more detail later, timers, switching to auto mode, night mode, which is where it'll just dim the display, which is quite good for at night, and it also lets you reverse the airflow direction, which also adjusts the graphic, that's quite cool. Now the really nice thing the app has, and really the only thing the app has in terms of controlling the fan that you can't do with the remote, is the oscillation. Like with the remote, you can just set the oscillation to different angles, but what you can also do is you can actually tell it to point to a specific direction. So if I tell it to do that and tell it to point over there, the fan will rotate to point to that angle and it'll stop and it'll just sit there. So this is really good if you've got it sitting in the corner of the room and there's multiple seating positions, because that means you could then sit in different positions and just use this to adjust the fan to tell it to point towards you. It saves you getting up and actually having to physically turn it. Now what's also really good with this is that you can tell it to oscillate in different positions. So for example, I could say oscillate 45 degrees and it'll start oscillating, but it'll only do it centered around where I've now told it to point. I could then say, right, instead of doing that, I want you to now turn around to here and oscillate over here. And it'll sit for a little second and think, turn around to that new position I've told it to point into, and then it'll start oscillating again. So that's really quite nice. Of course you do have to use the app for that, so I don't know how often I'll ever really do that because I have to get my phone out, whereas I could just use the remote, but it is quite nice. Where I could see this being useful is if you've got a much larger room, say the sort of living room that's divided in two, where you've maybe got a living area and then a kitchen area. You could put the fan in between those two spaces and then use this to point it into those two spaces and pick where you want the air. Do you want it in the kitchen or do you want it in the living room, without having to physically turn the fan round. So it's quite nice that it has that. And it does show the slight benefit of having the app control. I'm not really excited about having app control on a fan, that wasn't really why I bought it, but it does show the sort of benefits you can have from that. What you can also see here is the air quality. So if we swipe up, we can see we have some historical data. So this is the overall figure of air quality. So we can see we have that spike yesterday from me cooking. And you can see when it spiked up and it's cleared out the air. This was a test day when I cooked again, but this time I actually ran the air purifier the entire time I was cooking, so it didn't spike as high. We can then see what caused the spike. So we go to PM2.5, so that's particle matter. That was obviously caused by the cooking. Similar with PM10s, that's larger particles. On the other hand, when we look at volatile organic compounds, we can see there hasn't really been much of that historically, apart from earlier today. You can see that spike there when I used that air freshener. And then NO2 has consistently been fairly low. I've not really had the windows open, so there's not been much car exhaust coming in. You can also view some temperature history, and then the humidity history as well. So yeah, the data you get out of it is quite cool. I don't know how much I'll really use the app, but it is quite nice to have. It's just really unfortunate that it requires you to have an account to log in. So yeah, the app control is really good. It's just, my experience is just kind of soured by the fact that you have to have an account to log into the app, because that just feels really unnecessary and could just limit the use of this in the future if Dyson stops supporting it. However, I suppose the good thing is that this app also is used for a lot of other Dyson products, not just a single model, so hopefully they'll support it at least for a little while. However, this also has one thing in terms of the smart functionality that's really niche, but also really cool. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I imagine most people watching this video aren't necessarily my normal viewers who are more technically inclined, so I'm probably going to get a bit technically nerdy right now. But once this is connected to Wi-Fi, you can actually control this over MQTT over your local network. And the app itself, when talking to the fan over your local network, when you're not using it remotely over the internet, the app also uses MQTT to talk to the fan. This isn't an officially supported method, but you can actually control these fans over MQTT and read the monitoring data out of them. There's a library called libpure-cool-link, I think, and someone's built that's a Python library you can use to talk to it, but I've also just been able to use normal MQTT client and read data out, and I'll try and integrate it with Node-RED. But that could be quite fun to play with, because at that point you wouldn't need the app. You could actually just use your own custom home automation system. That doesn't totally get over the issue with the app requiring a login though, because you do need to log into the app to at least get this first of all connected to Wi-Fi. So you could have an issue that if the app went out of support, you're then using it over MQTT, and then you need to reset it or need to change the Wi-Fi settings. You wouldn't then be able to do that if you couldn't get into the app. But if you can get this connected to Wi-Fi, you can actually control it over your local network without the app. Although it does require a lot of technical bodging, it's not really something I would recommend for the average person to try. But yeah, it does support MQTT bizarrely. So there you go. That was a look at the brand new Dyson TP07 Air Purifier. And hopefully that's given a fairly down-to-earth look at it. Is this a good unit? Does it work as a good purifier and a good fan? Yeah, it's pretty good. Is this the most mind-blowing, insane fan in the world that's changed my life? No, it's a fan with an air purifier attached, but it works. Is it worth £499? I would say no. In terms of functionality, it's not worth the cost. If you just want an air purifier and a fan, you can get very similar performance to this just by buying a separate air purifier and fan, and you might be paying about £150 for the two of them. With this, you're really paying for the design. You're paying because you want something that looks nice, that you can have sitting out in a room, that's nice to look at. Because realistically, what would you rather have sitting out in a room? That or that? You know, it looks nice, but you're paying a lot for the design and not as much for the performance. So yeah, if all you care about is air purification or fan performance, and then you're just going to chuck it away in a cupboard when you're not using it, there's probably no point buying this. Just get separate units. But if you want a device that looks really nice that you can have sitting out, then this is potentially a good option for you. It is just stupidly expensive. As for the smarter stuff, it is nice to have. It's not super useful, and the fact that the app requires an account really annoys me. That just is something I cannot accept with an app for a device like this, that it will force you to log into the app to use it. Just because something like a fan you're probably going to keep for a super long amount of time, so having the risk of the app suddenly not working is really annoying. But yeah, definitely pretty happy with it. It is just really overpriced for what it is. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching. And if you're interested in buying one of these, there's links in the description.